My name is Max Gagliardi, and we're live for this week's Talk.Energy Insights. We've got a special guest co-host, Jeremy Battle. Heik was on vacation this Friday, and he's taking the day off, but excited to have Jeremy on. He's came on the podcast before, and it was, and I've told you this, Jeremy, it was a very popular episode, so glad to have you and glad I could get you here on this Friday. How's it going?
Max, it's good to be here on Friday afternoon. Happy to fill in and be part of the B team. So, whatever I can do to help.
Whatever, man. You're the A team. Your episo's done really, really well. People see.
I sent it to all my family, and they must have watched it because it might.
Yeah, your mom watched it like 20 times or something.
Yeah, I don't even, to be quite honest, I don't know if they've seen it. So,
cool. Well, I think we've got some things we can talk on today. This has been there's been some topical events this week, and so we'll talk about some of the stuff that's been in the news, and then we'll touch on a few other things that you and I think are interesting. And so maybe just launch right in it here with just Biden this week calling, or I guess the White House technically this week putting out a release or a press release to call on OPEC to increase oil production. And I don't think this is being very well received from either side. I think that the oil and gas people are obviously a little up in arms here, given that they, stopped. They did the ban on federal leasing there for a minute, and then they did the Keystone Pipeline deal. And you've got, for example, the Governor Abbott coming out, putting out it was either a tweet or some kind of release saying that, we can do this here. Texas can fill this gap. Let's promote American jobs. You've got even rumblings on the left from people saying, look, I thought this was we're supposed to be reducing our carbon footprint here, and you're calling for more oil production. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I think it's a nice gesture from the White House, right? Saying they're trying to lower prices at the pump for people. But anyone in the energy sector who's been in E&P upstream, they've been here before and down this road and seen this type of you could call it political pleasing. They're trying to lower the prices. If you want to peel back the onion a little bit, the reason you're paying $5 per gallon in California versus $3.50 in Oklahoma or Texas, you get taxes. People are paying taxes. Those taxes were put in place to not only generate those states certain revenues, but they were trying to disincentivize. But as most of us know, price is rather inelastic on demand side with transportation. If you got to get to work, if you have to get to a meeting or dinner, you're going to pay $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 a gallon if you have to. And unfortunately, that's probably the path we're headed. And it's going to there's going to be some negative impacts on the economy if prices keep going up. It's nice to see oil prices, if you're in the energy sector, creep upward. That's a good thing for America. We need our energy sector to thrive. There's so many jobs that tied into that. At the same time, we've lost a lot of those jobs over the past, since 2015. So it's not as deep of an impact when prices tank as it has been in the past. But really, let's discuss who are the winners here of this, right? So right. If we're making less oil in the United States now, I haven't looked at the exact numbers. Do you know what the latest report is on the domestic production?
I don't have it in front of me, but if anybody wants it, we do a weekly newsletter. You can sign up, and I can send you out the Ancova one. I don't have it pulled up right now.
I want to say it's around, and again, I forgive my ignorance here. I think it's around 10.5 to 11-ish. Yeah. Might be a little higher of how much oil we're making. That's probably going to trend, what I've been reading, trend closer over the next several years down to probably 8 or 9 million per day.
I've seen that.
And we're consuming 20 in the United States, and I think world consumption is like 100. Roughly, and that's continuing to creep up, which is, the part of the reason that, oil prices go up is not just a domestic demand, it's also a world demand, right? Countries that want to have electricity are getting oil shipped into them, or I should say smaller countries. You have definitely energy dependent countries on oil. And then you're seeing LNG too, right? Where the price of natural gas has come up some. Which I think is really the unsung hero of the industry right now, is seeing the prices 33% higher than what they've been forecasting is really a good thing. And really these oil and gas companies who hedged are having to write these huge checks to they're hedging, and someone else is on the other side of that trade, right? So Yeah, it's really interesting. So back to the winners of the OPEC deal. It's OPEC itself. They control the game now. They control chips.
Right.
Unfortunately, we don't. We're limited on how much we can drill due to capital constraints
Right.
and the new environment which these public companies and private companies live in. They can't go and speculate on their position. They have to drill wells that they have results of the past to be put together probability studies. They can't just go out and say, hey, we think there's oil here. Let's attack it. Very few companies can do that. You might see some EOG wells or XTO even try to do a little bit of that, but you're not seeing too much of it like we saw before. So that's kind of a long answer to that.
Yeah,
So.
well, we'll get into the capital stuff here in a second. So you hit on a number of things, and I think it's the winners and the losers. And look, I don't try to be too political on the podcast, but there's some things like this that really, just bothers me, right? And I think it bothers a lot of people, and I don't think it just bothers people on the oil and gas side. I think it bothers people all around. It's like, look, you're either for a future world where we're not going to produce as much hydrocarbons, which is what this administration has staked as a priority. They're talking about it in the infrastructure bill. They're talking about it in future spending bills. It's an overall theme. And then when you see something like this come out where they're calling on our countries that, I don't want to call everybody in OPEC our enemy, but these people aren't our allies, really. I guess maybe you could say in some ways we have to, frenemies. But this isn't like this is, one of our, for example, Canada, right? We kind of slapped them in the face with this Keystone XL deal. They're absolutely one of our strongest allies. And then we turn around and we make a plea to, OPEC to increase their production. And I just think it's a bad look. I don't think it helps, the oil and gas industry here. I think, obviously we're not feeling positive about a lot of things. So it's kind of par for the course. But to me, what it comes down to is what are the goals? And I say this a lot. What's the practical way to get to those goals? And if the goal is to, do these things that this administration set out to do around the energy transition, all these things that they're saying, well, then offshoring carbon to other countries that have less environmental regulations than we do, like OPEC, for example. Some of these countries, they flare a ton of gas. Saudi Aramco flares just tremendous amounts of gas. Iraq flares. I think I've seen this stat, and I've said it before. It's like 4 times the amount of gas that California produces every year is flared there. You've got, and then you look at the full ESG angle from this, and it's like these people, they don't have the same civil, human rights, humanitarian rights for example, women or LGBTQ. There's a lot of issues in these countries. And so to enrich these countries and to call on enriching these countries further at the expense of what a lot of people would say American companies and American jobs, it's a bad look, in my opinion. And I don't know that anybody really on either side is saying it's a good look. So it's just an interesting move for them. I get why they're doing it. They want prices at the pump to come down. They want lower energy costs. But the reality is when we try to do these big sweeping changes to our energy markets, which is what this administration is trying to push, there's going to be volatility, and it's going to result, unfortunately for the consumer and unfortunately for the lowest income consumers, it's going to probably result in higher prices, which is just a reality. So again, I don't know there's much more to say on it than that, but before closing out that topic, just any other thoughts on just their overall move by the Biden administration? I just don't know. Kind of a head scratcher to me, honestly.
I think it's political pandering at the end of the day, Max. That would be great if they could get OPEC to increase production and lower the prices for the average consumer, but it's not realistic. And I think they're going to use that headline to show that they tried. OPEC is out for OPEC. They're not out for anyone else. Right. And so their goal is to get the world's most powerful economy to hand them as much money as possible. Right. No different than any other private enterprise. It's capitalism, right? And so, but they also understand they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. So they're methodically moving prices upward. I think you and I talked about this. Prices are going to continue to move upward. You could have some short-term headwinds with like this Delta variant, which, I think human viruses are just more publicized than they used to be. And I'm not going to get into the politics of viruses, but other than to say that, infectious disease is something that's been around for quite some time. And I think we're all learning to live around it. It's unfortunate, the social aspects that we've all had to live with the last 18 months. But I do think you're seeing oil actually hang in there, even with a Delta surge. And so what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that the market sees the end game of that Delta variant, and eventually it'll work itself out, and we'll continue on down the road as we did getting through the last round of this. So, to wrap that up, unfortunately, we're transferring our wealth. We're literally sending money to Saudi Arabia, to Russia, to Iran, to Iraq indirectly, and we're doing it. And where does that money trickle down? Well, it can go to things that are anti-American, anti-capitalism, really anti-freedom, for that matter, of other countries. And we sure hope that doesn't affect our national security, but unfortunately it does. And so we make less energy than we used to. It's just what it is.
It is. And so I think this goes well into the next segment, kind of talking about capital. And I don't want to touch too much on the public side of it, really focus more on some of the private stuff, because that's where I'm more tuned into. And there's been some other headlines this week. I think Larry Fink with BlackRock came out and gave his, I think it was either a letter or something to that he does his annual deal, and I was reading about it, and he's really calling on these financial institutions, these private financial institutions, to really just cut all capital for anything that's not in this energy transition, which is ironically defined a lot of times by BlackRock, because they're the ones that are setting these ESG standards through the MSCI indexes and these other things. And so you look at, and then there was another headline with I believe it was the New York Pension Fund. I could be wrong there. And they're saying, look, we're going to reevaluate any investment that we have that is related to oil and gas. And so on one side, you've got very, very strong, powerful forces that are saying we need to defund effectively the oil and gas industry. But then yet you have an administration saying that we can't have higher prices. We can't have higher prices. Well, those two things don't coexist. If you're defunding domestic production and you're defunding the capital markets to invest into products that make energy cheaper, specifically energy cheaper for, these are regressive, right? Because it's the poorest people that are impacted by it more so. So that's happening, and these are these big headlines. But even the conversations that you and I have had, I'm sure, in the private capital space, whether that be for things like acquiring minerals, whether that be for things like midstream, whether it be upstream development, it is very difficult right now, not just for guys like us that are entrepreneurs that want to go do projects in the space, but I think it's even difficult for the private equity groups and for, typical people that can go out and raise this capital from institutions. And my personal experience is that a lot of these groups, it's kind of like they don't know whether they're coming or they're going. They're getting a mandate to decarbonize, right? But there's not a ton of projects that have acceptable IRRs or that are even actionable that can accomplish that. And so what you're seeing is capital being starved, which is again why you're seeing the prices of oil and gas going up. And then there's also what the Fed is doing in inflation, and we'll hit on that here in the next segment. But kick it back to you to get your thoughts on all that.
Yeah. So really, based on everything you said, with less drilling as a result of less capital at the disposal of not only private equity but also public companies, you're seeing infill drilling. I mean, these are things, if you're in the space, you're paying attention, you understand that companies are very, very cautious, and they're going to stay that way for several years to come until something changes. And so as a result of less drilling stateside, and really demand is continuing to creep up. The price of oil, if you look at the 10-year chart, let's talk about from 2020 going to 2030, are headed upward. They just are. It's just the way it is. And so we're going to probably be looking at $125 to $150 oil around 2025. I don't think that's unrealistic, and I didn't run some analysis on that, Max, but I'm just saying from a big picture standpoint, the prices of all hard things are moving upward, and now we have fundamental tailwinds moving oil upward, and we're seeing some of that even in natural gas. So it's unfortunate, like you said, that due to a lack of investment because of some environmental forces on the pension fund side and whatever that are politically damaging our industry and costing us jobs on the state side. We're going to see the middle class and lower class get crushed, because the guy with $1,000 a month budget for discretionary spending is now seeing his $100 a month gas bill go to $250 or $300. How does that affect people? Well, it affects them on their ability to afford food. I mean,
Right.
what do you do, right? So, unfortunately, the gap will continue to widen in this country of wealth. The people with a lot of money will continue to have more money, and the people with not much money, it's going to be harder and tougher. And I don't mean that to crush the spirits of those people, but it's just another thing that they're going to have to work against. And so, how do we fix that? Well, we need to, and this is just my opinion is, from a domestic standpoint, and maybe we can tie this into inflation and supply chain issues.
Yeah.
And I'll touch on this here in a second, but we need to find a way to incentivize job creation on the state side that would help alleviate supply chain constraints. There needs to be some incentives like there are for natural gas, or not natural gas, for electric vehicles. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, like you can do a lot of things with what we have here. And again, this is a theme that I bring up a lot, which is how do we utilize our existing resources and our existing infrastructure to reach these goals? If, truly decarbonization is the goal, which there's people that are cynical that say that's actually not the goal. It's more about control and about investment flows, right? And they'll say that some of these things are buzzwords. But if truly the goal is decarbonization, we have the ability to do that. And we've already done it. I mean, like, look at the U.S. We're leading the world. But the problem is, you look at, there was a study this week that came out, and I can't remember the group that published it, but they basically said that using natural gas for, hydrogen projects was never going to do anything, because it was just, there's too much methane leaks in our natural gas infrastructure, and that any reliance at all on natural gas in a future world was fool's gold. Basically, is that we need to just completely give it up and move to 100% renewables. And so you read that, and it came from a credible group, and I wish I had it. I want to say it had to do with Stanford. Sorry, I don't want to misquote who it was from, but I did read this in a headline this week. And it's just like, well, that's not true. If you want to focus on methane leaks, we can fix that, right? Like, you can create incentives. There's a lot of old infrastructure, and it's not just oil and gas companies. I didn't see anything in headlines. I don't know if you saw anything on this infrastructure bill that they were going to put money towards giving people incentives to go reduce methane leaks. I didn't see any. Maybe it was out there in that, but that's something right there, right? Throw some money in incentives. Those are easy, low-hanging fruit. Let's look at some of these long-haul pipelines. Let's look at some of these bigger infrastructure facilities. Can we reduce methane leakage or emissions? And so when you look back at the things we have available in our toolkit, there's a lot to do, a lot of great things, but I'm not seeing that being pushed forward, and we're seeing other things that, quite frankly, are inflationary, and we'll switch over to that topic, which are going to cause the price of energy to go up, which is going to cause the price of consumer goods to go up. I mean, look at propane right now. I don't know if you followed it, but the propane market is in a crazy spot. We are short on propane, and we just went from a period where we had an abundance of it because we're stripping all this propane out of rich gas from these fields, all the associated gas, like out of plays like the Permian or the Mid-Continent, or these other plays with rich gas. And we went from an abundance of propane to now being short on propane, and we're seeing prices spike. Well, propylene and ethylene and these petrochemicals are the raw inputs for like everything, basically. So it's inflationary. So, and again, if they don't want these inflationary forces, let's quit pushing policies that are going to be inflationary. And then we're also seeing the supply chain stuff, which I know you're hearing some interesting things in the market. So to close out the discussion on capital, I do want to, you did make one point before we hopped on the call around the debt markets. There are some positives here.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about just some of the positives around the capital
side. Some of the positives, yeah, this has been a really hard topic on energy and how we're getting crushed on a lot of things working against us. So some of the positives that the debt markets are open for those who, for your E&Ps with production, and you need to recapitalize some existing debt, or if you want to take on new debt, it's a great time to do it. These rates have opened the door to access more capital at a cheaper price. And so the energy industry is able to breathe and exhale a little bit and function. So these companies are able to go and drill and make returns at $70 oil, even $60 oil. So I think that's a great thing, and that's creating jobs. They're as far as some of the other positives of that. I'll just say this about public companies. I really hope that they avoid share buybacks because that's ultimately telling the Wall Street that you really don't have any good ideas for your capital. Your business model is not sufficient for the capital, so therefore we're going to return it and take shares off the market to ultimately make myself, as the CEO, and all my friends who are working for me wealthier. And I think that's a tragedy of the commons for corporate America. That's why people protest corporations, because people are doing things that ultimately are out for their own self-interest and not for what's going to generate new jobs, right? It's going to be going out and trying to reinvest in your business. I think you posted about this on Twitter the other day, where you're saying you don't really like investing in stocks, but you like investing in your own business because you ultimately can control the outcome of those dollars. There's going to be forces.
By the way, I like stock baskets of stocks. I just don't like trying to pick the winners.
Sure.
That's the part that I just get jaded on the individual stock picking. A long time ago, I got just jaded on it. And don't take it the wrong way, I'm invested in equities. I just get tired of the picking the winners thing. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, there are a lot of people who try to pick winners in E&P, and then they ended up with holding paper and nothing else, because the common stockholders got wiped out. Then you have CEOs that cashed out. They got paid money to stay on board throughout bankruptcy, and a lot of money. And those are things that need to be addressed, not just in our industry, but in really in this country. I mean, I'm not asking for government intervention, but I do think there needs to be some accountability there. If you drive a company into the ground, why should you be rewarded for, in other words, you win either way. So those are some things that I really, like I said, I really hope public companies find ways to invest in new technology, because if we invest in technology in our industry, that's what's ultimately is going to open the door for new growth. We need to find ways to improve our inventories of our wells. We've got the land. The land's not the problem. The problem is how do we go and find the resources layered down below there, which we know are there. How are we going to get it out in a more efficient manner? What are some technologies we can do? Why not take 25 million of capital, 50 million of your capital that was, and go and try and do some science experiments? And there are companies that are doing that. It takes a stroke of luck to figure out ways to make it work. But again, for the future of this industry, obviously prices are going to help us, but technology is going to be the other thing. And so when you get higher prices, it'll give us the hunting license or the right to go and to take the chances of investing in more technologies. So I think overall, the industry has a good future ahead of it. I think the next few years are going to be a little tight, a little tough for some, but there are good days ahead. And I don't want people to think that America is done investing in the E&P space, because ultimately, as they say, low prices solve low prices. Yep. Well, high prices are going to solve capital investment. Right. That's my take. So.
For sure. And so there are, other headwinds though, outside of the capital markets and outside of the ESG movement and outside of these other things that affect oil and gas. And right now you've heard kind of anecdotally, and I've seen it too, not just in oil and gas, but in a lot of these energy spaces. I had a guest on my last episode talking about the solar industry, and he's in the wholesale solar space, and the supply chain constraints have just been brutal. All across it, everything from the Chinese, forced labor debacle that's been going on, and them having to evaluate that and trying to source it from other places, and that's causing prices to go up, to all the stuff with COVID. But what are you hearing in the oil and gas space, if anything, around supply chain constraints, and again, this theme of just kind of inflation flowing through?
So raw materials are actually causing some constraints on, like for instance, like with your drilling pipe. And I don't know if this is the case for every company out there that supplies this, but their yards are essentially empty of pipe in some of these places. Doesn't mean you can't get it out there. You might have to pay a little more. And some of these drill pipe companies are not willing to take the risk of locking in higher raw material costs. And I understand these costs are 60 to 70% higher than what they used to be. So it's a significant difference. And so if you're the company, if you're making this pipe and you're selling it for, let's just call it $1 and per unit, and now you have to sell it for $1.80 per unit to even turn a profit, are you willing to take the risk of your costs now being, your COGS now being $1.50? You need to sell it for $1.80. and then the raw material price comes down over the next 6 months on your time it takes to lock in the raw materials and then get it to market. So companies are just not willing to take those chances. They've seen what happened with lumber. They've seen what happened with other where the prices have just shot up on the supply chain, and then they've come down. So no one wants to get caught at the apex, right? And so you're seeing some companies that want to drill and they're having to wait on their pipe a little bit. So again, I'm sure some other people could probably enlighten you, even on Twitter side or anyone else you bring on here. I'm not an expert on that, but those are just some things I heard that was interesting. That's essentially that's limiting some of the drilling, you could say.
Right. So I keep talking about it, but supply chain is super fascinating. I want to have more discussions about people that are experts in the space. One thing that's really struck me, because I've come from more of a midstream background, is that the nature of these contracts in midstream, a lot of these are long-term contracts. And the interesting thing is a lot of these contracts tie their escalation for their fees. Like if you got a 20-year agreement, which taking a step back, 20-year agreements are kind of crazy if you think about it. That's a long term. That's a long time to try to predict what's going to happen in the world. You have a 20-year agreement and your inflation or you've got an escalator on your fees. Let's say you got $1 fee to start and you say, hey, I'm going to escalate at CPI. And then if you're a savvy producer, which the producers that we represent in Ancova are savvy because we help them out and we tell them, no, put a cap on that. You can say CPI capped at some amount, 3% or whatever, 2.5%, 4%. Well, a couple of years ago, that might not have seemed like a crazy thing to do. But then you look at today, and CPI is higher than those caps in those contracts. And if you're an Ancova client, maybe you got one of those caps in there, which is good for the producer, bad for the midstream. But then you look at how they calculate CPI and whether that's really even representing what this inflation actually is. And you take into account the supply chain stuff. I'm sure that there are infrastructure providers today that are looking at projects where they're contractually guaranteed to build, and they're looking at what their supply chain is going to cost them to build. And it's probably, if I had to guess, and again, this is anecdotal, that was not in their forecasts around some of these raw materials and some of these things. And so I think that this is flowing through every industry, not just oil and gas. And it's everything. For example, what I talked about earlier about propylene and ethylene and these petrochemical prices. Think about just the packaging on food. All food is like packaged now in these plastics, right? And so you're going to the grocery store. It doesn't take a common person can go to the grocery store right now and look around and see that prices are up. Tyson just came out this week and said that it was the ex-CEO of Tyson, I believe, and this is something I saw in the headlines and watched a little bit of the clip, and he said he's never seen anything like this. He said it may be transitory, but right now, if you're at the grocery store, it feels very real, and it may stop at some point, but it's not stopping right now. And it's the raw materials, the supply chain, everything is getting more expensive, and we have an economy that is heating up. I know that the Delta variant is out there and it's looming, and everybody's got some trepidations around that, and we see a lot of memes about our fall plans maybe getting canceled because of Delta. It's nothing to joke about, but I just don't see this stopping. You just got the Fed pouring fuel on the fire with all this spending that they're doing. That money has to go somewhere. You've got the supply chain constraints. You've got energy prices going up, and it's all going to equal a higher price environment for not only people that are trying to operate their business like oil and gas and energy producers, but also just the everyday consumers. And it's a wild time, in my opinion.
Sure. Definitely short-term inflation we're all seeing out there right now, and it's housing prices are through the roof. And again, another area the middle class gets crushed because they don't own the big homes. Other people near the top own the big homes, so they make more, and your income does not fall in line with home prices, right? So if wages aren't increasing, who wins? Are the people who own the assets, right? So the one thing I didn't give a detail on when I was talking about the drilling pipe is the reason the raw materials are so high is because a lot of the steel that they're going and sourcing is in high demand because of automotives, right, and also appliances. So where is the source of demand coming from there? Well, everyone has all this extra money, whether it's PPP funds, whether it's these money that's been sent by the government, even unemployment checks add up to enough money to where people can now go afford a car that they couldn't used to afford. So all this excess liquidity that's been put into our economy has really caused a lot of these supply chain hiccups. I think it will work itself out. It will work itself out as long as they stop handing out money like it's going out of style, right? So, and they are, and we got to stay on that path, because you run into these issues in your economy when you just hand out cash. It's just there were not, people have to go work for it, and that's what keeps the economy moving, right? So there's a reason there's a shortage of help at a lot of places, because people are getting by without having to work. So we've got to work that out, and I think we will. And so really, Max, overall, I will say in the long haul, I used to be big on the worried about inflation, but I will say with all this excess debt that we're making is actually very deflationary overall on the long haul. And I'm not an economist, and I can't tell you exactly why that's the case, but I did read a couple of articles, and they sounded like they knew what they're talking about. But
yeah,
my point is that it is true that all this excess debt, which we see being printed, it's a concern, but it's also deflationary. And technology is also very deflationary too. So automation that we're seeing, that's very deflationary. It gets people products, goods, and services for less than what it would take without automation. So you could definitely short-term inflation we're living and seeing right now with all the liquidity pumped in the system. So it will be interesting to see how long that continues forth. The Fed doesn't seem to worry about it, but the Fed also has these reporting mechanisms where they're able to make it look like we're only seeing 2% inflation, which is really not the case. They're able to lock that in on the reporting side, on the CPI. It's really closer, that they're saying closer to double digit, like 10% inflation we're seeing on the short term. And I think everyone can look around and see that. I mean, go try to buy a new Tahoe today, and you're used to, you go in there and you see the MSRP, and instead they put a plus amount, not a minus, right? Yeah. So they're saying, hey, we have to mark these up because the cost of raw materials, if you made this today instead of 6 months or a year ago, is now more. So
right.
Really interesting time in this world. Who would ever dream, in the middle of COVID, March 2020, that we would be where we are now? But here we are, and I think we're seeing the side effects of all the liquidity that's been pumped into the system.
Yep. I agree, and it's going to ripple through the energy space, the oil and gas space. I talked earlier about the solar space. It's really everything. I don't think anything is really safe from where we're at with these price increases. But to your point, ultimately, do price increases eventually cause things to be deflationary because people start to not be able to afford that new home or not to be able to afford that new F-150? And so at some point, if the spigot gets turned off from the federal level on the stimulus and the things that they're doing in terms of the pumping money into consumers, I don't think the stimulus is going to stop at the terms of the printing the money. Maybe they'll slow it down. But some of this stuff is, in theory, self-correcting, but it's going to be tough. I mean, we're an economy built on, debt and built on the premise of increasing asset prices. If prices of assets do not increase, then it becomes very difficult to service that debt, which is ultimately not a good thing, which is why the Fed is so concerned and why the government's so concerned with increasing the liquidity and increasing inflation. And so it's just this kind of circular reference where I don't know what the end result is going to be. But back to your point, it's the people that hold hard assets that have been rewarded. And this is no secret. If you went into 2020 and you had hard assets, you're looking at yourself today and you're probably 30% wealthier in those hard assets than you were at the beginning of 2020. If you did not have hard assets, you were probably, your assets, your cash, or your, and again, I'm not trying to say it's been 30% inflation. I'm just talking about the things that people want to buy. They're more expensive. And so it's going to impact everybody. It's going to impact our industry. And I think everything we've talked about in this conversation is pointing towards, in theory, more expensive energy prices. And I think that's something that we're going to be seeing into the future. And I can't predict further than tomorrow because I don't know what's going to happen. But at least that's what the trends seem to be telling us.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, the chart, when it goes up and down, things move up and go down. But overall, they're arching upwards. And I think energy prices will do that, even though we could run into some headwinds, whether it's a virus or other demand forces that affect our. But it's certainly not a supply problem stateside as far as us making too much. I don't think that's going to be the issue. you would have to deploy a whole new entire workforce of people to go turn back and go drill at the rate we used to drill. So I get just a lot of good things ahead from the pricing standpoint if you're in the E&P side. Unfortunately, not great for the middle and lower class who are their discretionary spending is impacted tremendously by higher prices at the pump.
Yep, that's right.
That's reality. But
that is the reality. And look, this has been a great discussion, and it's it's getting late here on a Friday afternoon. Be respectful of your time. I appreciate you jumping in here and doing this. It's been fun. Like I said, I wasn't just joking about the episode that we did together. It was one that was fun for me. One, because you're my friend, and two, because we got to do it in person, and I enjoy that. And we also, like I said, in that episode, we always have a bunch of good offline discussions. So anytime we can bring it online, again, that's a positive. And so thank you for your time, Jeremy. It's been a fun talking to you, and I will let you go enjoy your weekend now and get back to work. I know you're busy doing a lot of things. You're busy.
Yeah. No, Max, I appreciate having me on, and this Friday worked out where we could both connect. And I want to thank Mr. Heikkinen and for letting me fill in. Feel like I'm filling in for a big talk show host. So I'm happy to be here. No one knows who the hell I am, but so I'm just another guy in Oklahoma City, right?
I beg to differ. The hundreds and hundreds of people that tuned into that last episode, more so than other episodes, I think that for some reason, maybe it was just your family clicking on it over.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, we had some good talking points on there, and I look forward to getting back on there with you and kind of refreshing some of those, and that'll be a fun time. So, but again, thanks for having me on, Max. Enjoy the weekend. Hope everyone else who tuned in has a great weekend, and keep safe out there. And look forward to getting after next week.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks,
Max. Soon.
See you, buddy.